you barely escaped the major scandal back then.
I didn't know. I knew how they picked their contestants. They gave them thorough 4-hour, 5-hour tests about their professed expertise, whether it was, poetry or whatever. And so they knew what the contestant knew. And if they would, no matter how difficult the question they would build, if it would go into the strength of what they knew the guy knew, they would expect to have an outcome that would be favorable for him or her. If they wanted to dump a guy, for instance, there was a guy who came on and said, my expertise in 18th century literature. And they took him on, but they gave him a category of English literature. At some point, maybe $16,000, they decided to dump him. And they suddenly gave him a question about Beowulf. Now, that's English literature, but it's not 18th century, and the guy blew it because he didn't know a very complicated question about Beowulf. That's the way I assumed they were controlling the show. It was only later when this whole thing broke and the congressional hearings started, I thought, oh, my God, I could not believe what they were doing. It was such an example of arrogance and power. And, of course, I got to know the guy who started it, who was doing 21 and who was producing that. And I did a show with him for CBS that he was producing in the when the heck was it? I don't know. It was the 1970s or something. And
you're talking about Dan Enright.
Danny Enright.
Yeah.
And Danny and I would, I'd be at his house. We'd have brunch and things like that. I said, Danny, he said, I didn't do anything wrong. It was only entertainment. I said, Danny, of course you did things wrong. You lied. You professed that this was a legitimate, and you did it. So we agreed after a while not to talk about it. But later on, in a documentary, he said that, he'd started it because the first show they did, the two contestants got everything wrong. They didn't get one thing right, and the sponsor said, that happens next week. You're out. I'm canceling the show. So they decided the best way to do it was to make sure that they would play it totally scripted, and everybody would act out their parts, the contestants. And it worked, and it became a big hit show. I don't know if that was the inspiration for others, or the others just kind of got there because they were getting pressures to control the show. For instance, one of the stories I know is that Refson was looking at Brothers.
Oh, Joyce Brothers.
Joyce Brothers, who was she was a cute psychologist who was an expert on boxing.
Yeah, we've talked about it on the show. Remember that, Gilbert?
And she studied up
right
on it.
Well, she went and met them first, and they said they'd like her, but what she was proposing to be an expert on, they said, that doesn't work. We love the opposites. We love the unexpected. Yeah, I mean, a few of them, boxing, and she went home and became an expert on boxing.
So funny.
And they took her on. And they tried to dump her at 16 because Refson said she doesn't wear makeup. And that was not the model he was selling, because that's what he was selling was makeup.
Ah.
They switched at 16 to referees instead of boxers. And she knew it. And then she went on to win the whole thing.
They tried to dump her with a question about referees.
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
It didn't work. But that all came later. I knew none of this, of course, when it was happening.
Right.
And what was the name of the girl the wonderful actress who
Patty
just died?
Duke.
Patty Duke.
Yeah.
And we had lunch, and she told me about her life with them. She was a spelling bee champ, and they gave her the answers.
Do you know this, Gil?
Yeah. Go ahead.
And then, years later, when she was 15, she was one of the witnesses called by the Senate for the hearings to testify. I think because she was a high-profile name, they wanted to have stars. But anyway, she was taken in hand by somebody from the staff and taught how to lie to the Senate.
Unbelievable.
That's how corrupt this thing became. And she did. She lied. And as she was about to step down, this is Patty telling me the story. As she was about to step down, one of the avuncular members of the Senate staff said, "Now, Patty, is everything you told us true?" And she said, "No." And they put her back on the stand, and then she told them what happened.
Wow.
Oh, my.
But that corruption was so pervasive. And a lot of guys got off free. You know, the guys from 21 got exiled.
Jack Barry and Dan Enright.
Yeah.
Did you see the movie Quiz Show, by the way?
I did.
Sonny
and
Fox?
I was and it was produced by a guy who had done a wonderful documentary on this, which is why he ended up with Quiz Show.
I see.
And I was on that, and so was that it was on that one that Danny Enright finally told what had happened. I called the lady he had been living with at that point after he died. I said, "Why did Danny finally decide to tell the truth?" She said, "I think he knew he was near the end of his life."
Tell Gilbert how you washed out a $64,000 challenge with Vincent Price. He'll find that one entertaining.
Well, it turned out I had a predilection for asking the answers. I mean, I was inventing what's the game show where they ask the answers?
Oh, Jeopardy!
I was inventing Jeopardy. He got rich and I got fired. You know, there's no justice to this. So once I did it, maybe twice, and then the big one was at Vincent Price and the jockey. What was his name?
Oh, I can't remember. It's in the book.
Yeah, Vincent Price and
I'll
the
dig it out.
jockey. Both were art collectors, so that was a wonderfully odd pairing. This autocratic, tall Vincent Price, right, and this little, wiry jockey. Both of them were very skilled and they had a lot of knowledge. Now I'm at the $64,000 level. The jockey had gone through and answered all the things correctly, I believe, and that was on Vincent. And there were it was like a 12 or 15 part, one of those things where there were 12, 15 parts. So I had questions on one side and I had to flip over for the other side. So I said, okay, let me review the ones you still haven't answered. So I go down, bum, 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 flip the card. And the first thing I look at is Van Gogh. And I said, Van Gogh. And that was the answer.
Oh.
And, I was waiting for the heavens to open up or the stage to open up. So I didn't know what to do. And so they finally decided to give them even money. But after that, they said, no, you got to go. And you know what? They were right. I never was comfortable doing that show. It just didn't work for me. I was under such intense pressure. I was getting called in by the head of Young and Rubicam saying, when you say $64,000, you're not saying with enough, I'm going to take $64,000 $1 bills and lines so you see how you visualize what and then they would say, get rid of the losers. Get rid of the losers fast. I mean, these guys would come out who had lost, let's say, the $32,000 level, and they had just blown $32,000. They came out of the booth. And I just wanted to hug them and say, that's okay. Life is going to go on. That was me. They said, get rid of them fast. Yeah, there were those strictures and I had so many people giving me advice, so many people, handling me about all these things. That was not me. I was never comfortable. I never should have done it. I knew it when I said earlier, I wouldn't hire me. I was right. And I just knew that. I just was never comfortable doing game shows.
And yet you did a handful of them after that, too.
I did one major syndicated one, the movie game.
You remember the movie game?
I liked the movie
with Army
game.
Archerd?
Yes. That didn't last long, but I liked that.
Well, it lasted long. I didn't last long. I did the first 2 cycles, and then I said, you know what? I tell my agent, I said, tell them I want to double the fee. They said they won't. I said that's good because I want to go back. I want to produce. I really want to produce, and I don't want to be out here in California. My family's in Connecticut. I just get me out of this show. But anyway, it was one of those shows that I didn't have any great interest in doing or find it any I got no joy out of doing that show. Let me put it that way. I really wanted to produce. I really, really wanted to produce by that time.
And it's a funny thing, getting back to how you wanted to hug the people who lost, and so you being human worked against you.
Yeah, I guess. You're put into a compressor, and when you're a game show host, you're a traffic cop, and you got to keep the thing moving. You got to say the right words. You got to keep the rules right. So you're a traffic cop, and it doesn't leave very much room for being you.
And now, with Patty Duke, was she traumatized by that for the rest of her life?
I don't think so. I mean, Patty went on to do great things after that, so I don't think she was traumatized. Yeah. But it certainly, I think, stuck in her craw that she had to go through that, and that was not a graceful moment to have to live through, both for being a cheater on national television and then lying to the Senate. That's got to be some pretty traumatic stuff that never quite leaves you.
So along the journey, you found that you really were good at producing, and you wanted to produce original television.
I loved being I loved being in charge.
Right.
I loved that. I loved shaping things. I loved shaping things the way I wanted them to come out. While I was doing Wonderama, I produced a musical called The Cowboy and the Tiger, which was on
with Jack Gilbert.
Yeah.
Oh,
one of our favorites.
Yes.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We love Jack Gilbert.
Yeah. And I cleared Jack was on the blacklist.
Oh, yes.
Still, when I decided to use him, I didn't know this. 1963, I said, Kennedy's the president. This is not the 60s. This is 19. What I say was 19. This is not the 50s, the 40s. This is now, today. I couldn't believe there was still a blacklist.
So this was the communist blacklist.
Yeah. Because Jack had been a communist, and Jack had been a left-winger. And for 10 years, he could not work on television or in the movies. For 10 years. He could do Broadway, but he couldn't do those two things. Now, I say, I want Jack. So I put his name in. And the agent, and it gets very quiet. I called the agent. I said, what's happening with Jack? You better get somebody else. I said, why? He said, they won't clear him. I said, you go back and tell ABC that if Jack Gilbert is not cleared, there ain't no show. I'm not doing the show without Jack. Just tell him that. And then a few days went by, and finally he called up and said, okay, it's cleared. I got him off the blacklist. No. Oh, I remember one wrinkle. He was on television for a year doing the Cracker Jack commercial.
Oh, sure.
Yes. I remember those.
Me
and
too.
I said, wait a minute. He's been all over the country. He's been on. What is this you get? No. But we didn't use his name. I said, oh, so the message I'm getting if I use those two words, Jack Gilbert, the Republic crumbles, is that what you're telling me? I just was furious with that. I couldn't stand that.